Hi, evening everyone. Welcome to the second last session of Optional Forex. I think it has been a rather fruitful year for me since starting this show. So this is the second last session. So today the indicator I'm going to talk about is, before that, I've already uploaded the indicator into the folders, which is called Tenkan. No, wait a minute. Yep, the Tenkan, which is actually part of the Ichimoku family. Yeah, so I think people are familiar with the cloud. Yeah, I think that's the most famous part of the Ichimoku indicator. Yeah, and of course they have a total of various other combinations. I think the Ichimoku total have about 5 indicators in depth that can be used in various manner. Yeah, so the cloud is the more popular one, but today I'm just going to talk about Tenkan, which visually the representation is a bit different. Yeah, I mean, or it's just different calculations. So I've actually done the same usual sort of backtest in it. Wait a minute, this shouldn't be ST. I just changed it to TS to get that correct. Yeah, so before that, which we have tested, HMA still comes out on top. Tenkan is above super trend. I mean, super trend overall comes out negative. Tenkan is not that it's better by a lot. I mean, it's still in positive by 1%. But not to say that it's totally bad. Yeah. So please bear in mind that when I was testing the past 4 indicators, the main objective was to find a good, or not say good, but an okay trend filter, right? So hence the way I tested it, it is not meant to be an entry filter. Yeah. So now from the way I approached the testing, it is not ultimately for me to find something that is profitable. I mean, if it's a profitable, it's bonus. But if it comes out at plus minus 10%, I would still think that as a trend filter, it does work. Yeah. So as an entry, definitely it don't work in its default stage, default settings. But as a trend filter, I still think it does work. Now I'm going to give you my rationale for justifying that. So after testing all the various pairs, you can see that the total reward comes out only a positive 1%, which is by all means not fantastic. Yeah. So I'm going to again go through the way that I tested it. So once you plug this indicator on the screens, everything I go by default. Again, I use the zigzag indicator as a, what I call it, to put my stop losses. Now, so there are arrows on it, and this is what we know as a zero line crossover. So when there's a zero line crossover, we go short on it. And where's my zigzag? It actually disappears. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of how I did it. So for example, you can see that this will be a long entry because there's a green arrow on top of it. Then you can just assume a market entry and a stop loss below. If it hits the stop loss, we'll count that as a loss. And then here again, there's another entry. So this will be how it is being placed, simulated. So the moment if it's in profit, but there's an opposite signal that comes out, we will attempt to close the trade at the next two level, which is either it can be your entry, which will be known as a break even, or the next 1R. Yeah, so I can't calculate the risk to reward if I attempt to close it in a simulated environment. I can't attempt to close it immediately. I need to, for the ease of calculation, it has to be either the one above or below. So in this case, for this particular trading setup, it will be counted as a 1R win. Just one more example. So you can see that this has a arrow up. So again, we assume that we'll be jumping into a trade with a stop loss at the last swing. So obviously this one will hit our stop loss. Yeah. So this is actually how I commence the testing pertaining to a trend filter. Yeah. So in this manner of testing, what I attempt to actually gain out of it is to actually find a good trend filter. And I'm happy that in the past 4 trend filter which I tested, HMA still comes out on top. So that is one that maybe in my future testing systems implementation, I will probably rely on that quite a fair bit. Yeah. Now, this is not to say that for this particular indicator taken set is totally useless. It is not. Now, I still highly emphasize that, look guys, if you want to find it, an indicator can be used in many different ways. So as I mentioned repeatedly, for the past 4 sessions, I've been testing it in the context of trend filter. And I did gain some knowledge about this particular indicator. Now, there's one particular setup I have to point out that it does not come often, but when it does, it seems to indicate a pretty high win rate. And what is that? So if you notice for this particular taken set indicator, there are times whereby the signals are repeated in the same direction. So usually you have one down, up, down. That's the usual case for it. But there are times you can have actually two buy signal or two sell signal back to back. And what I do observe, okay, if you do want to use this in the sense of an entry, is that when there's two buy signal or two sell signal back to back, it does indicate a higher probability that the trade will go in your particular manner. So you can see that for this one, the first one, long, but obviously we won't get trigger in the context of a pending order. So this one will be a no-go. I mean, since we don't get trigger in, then you can see over here, one long, another long. So this will be the candle. Eventually you'll get trigger in and get some pretty good, awesome profits. Again, depending on where you put your stop loss, but I will always remain the same style of trading. I'll put my stop loss as last swing. Now, for those of you who are a bit lost, I'm jumping in between a trend filter context and an entry context. So now I'm just pointing out that what I observe is that for an entry context, this may be a viable trading method. It doesn't come often, but it does happen. So again, a sell, there will be this candle. You can see that priced does travel. I'm pretty sure I have another somewhere. This will be a stop loss. You can see a sell. So this one will be triggered. If our stop loss is somewhere here, it's not quite worth it. Yeah, so I'll consider this a loss. So this will be another back to back, which will be in this candle. Yeah, but if it's a pending order, then it won't get triggered. So you can actually exploit it in that manner, because this is something which I observed after testing multiple pairs. When there's a signal back to back in the same direction, it does seem to indicate that this is a higher probability setup, which is all good. I mean, these are some of the things that I glimpsed through when doing a manual back testing, which one will never know if you just purely use an EA to do testing. But there are value in actually doing manual back testing. You do glimpse some valuable information. Now, the next thing which I want to point out, now in the context of trend trading, right, even for both super trends, which also, if you recall, the results of super trend doesn't come up fantastic. Let's say super trend, you can see that it actually comes out at -20 after testing multiple pairs. Tenkan comes out at 1%, that is awesomely fantastic. There are different ways to use it. So again, earlier in the show, I mentioned that as a trend filter context, I don't think this one works particularly well. But again, please remember that I'm using a default setting. If you change the default setting, you might have come up with very different results, vastly different results. But what I wish to point for this is something interesting also in the course of my backtesting is that, look, if you combine this in a trend filtering context and an entry indicator, that means you slap on a second Tenkan. So if you look at my screen closely, so this is what I've done. So this particular indicator, it does have the MTF. That means it can actually, so if you switch to H4, it can detect the settings in the higher time frame, D1 daily or W1, which is the weekly. So what I've done is actually I've cobbled the indicators together. You can see that on my screen, one is actually D1, The other is H4, which is my current time frame. So the moment I do that, and just give yourself a simulated scenario, is that, look, if the daily gives me a sell signal, and you jump to a lower time frame H4, and you trade the very next sell signal, you might just end up with a somewhat profitable strategy. I didn't test this, but this is again my observation. And if you look at it, I'll just give you a few examples. So you can see D1 gives you a sell signal. Then the next sell signal in H4, if you jump it in, it will be in this candle. Let me see here. You can see that price indeed did travel. So next thing you gotta decide is that when should you get out? I mean, there are different ways of interpreting. So the one way that you can actually deem to get out is that the moment price goes through some kind of retracement, that means you can see that the red bars are actually strong selling bars, and the moment the color is fading, it does indicate that the momentum is fading. So that's actually when you should be getting out. Or again, you can get out when there's an opposite signal, depending on which you want. So again, what I wish to point out is that if I trade this and you let it run, or even if you get up when the momentum is fading, it does give some pretty good profits, I would say. So next example, again, you can see daily gives you a buy signal. H4, we are trading next buy signal. Right, but within this week, you can see that, by the way, this lines on my screen indicates 1 week. So within the week, there's nothing, no buy signal, forget about it. Again, sell signal from the daily time frame. So if you jump in at the next sell signal, which is this candle, you can see that price actually does go a fair bit. Yeah. So the same indicator, but used in different contexts. And I'm sure any of you who is a trader out there, you will agree with me that multi-time frame analysis is actually a very, very important and integral part of trading. That means you don't just look at one time frame, you take a cue from a higher time frame and then you jump to a lower time frame for a much more precise entry. This is a very, very common trading system. Multi-time frame, even with indicators, the same can be achieved. And you might just end up with pretty awesome results, I would say. Yeah, again, this particular manner which I'm presenting to you now is not something I've tested, but again, which is something I've observed. Seems to work out well. Yeah. So while as purely as a trend filter, I would say it's rather shitty. But if you combine it as a trend filter from a higher time frame and you jump down to the lower time frame for an entry, the results might just worth taking a second look. Right? So for those of you who are interested in exploring other trading systems, especially the Ichimoku, is that how I'm supposed to pronounce it? Ichimoku? I don't know, whichever that is. You do have a standard set of indicators on your MT4. Let me see, can I find that? It'll be this actually. Yeah, I don't study this particular indicator, but I mean, when I first started initially trading, I thought the club looks pretty interesting. Yeah, so I take a subset of these indicators and just testing the Tenkan Sun. So for those of you who are interested in trading the Ichimoku system, maybe this is something that you can explore. I mean, I've done the first part of the legwork for you. I just love exploring things. Maybe you can do the second part and see if it does somehow fit into your trading style. Alright, so with that, Mike, I have to trouble you to actually post a link so that our guests can actually download the indicators should they want to. I've actually, let me stop sharing for a while. I've done some housekeeping just to make sure you all have a better quality of life when you want to download. Right, so let me see. Okay. Yep. So all the past indicators I put it into this folder. You can download if you want to. How do I use them? You can refer to my past YouTube sessions. It's all in there. This will be the latest Tenkan Kijun-san histogram. Right, you can download this and take it for a spin, try it out. If you want the results, always click on the link YouTube backtest. There's only one sheet in there, so you can see the links. And usually I will have attached the settings which I've used. Now, the earlier part of my testing, I've always played around with the settings, but the later part, the past since June, I tried to test the default settings. Now, I can be frank with you, is most of the time the default settings actually don't work well. Yeah, interesting to know. You can test it out on your own, but to me it doesn't work well. You need to adopt in today's context. Yeah. Like the standard set for this will be 12 and 26, which really bears no meaning for the chart. If you're gonna trade it on daily time frame, I would say 5, 10, 20, 5, 10, 15, 20 will be a much more meaningful value. But you can go with Fibonacci, which people usually use 34 and some other numbers. I forgot about that. Yeah. So that's it for today. I mean, if you have any question, put it in. I'll be happy to answer about this particular indicator. Now, my last session for this year will actually be 2 weeks down the road. Let me see if we can combine the past testing, all the different indicators together, and see if I can give you something interesting. It's always good to end the year with positive results. I mean, actually half of my sets here ends up in positive. You can actually take them and actually play long. But let's see if in my own testing, can I come up with something even better? Alright, with that, thank you for joining me today. I hope you have some fun with all the indicators which I've tested and show you all the results. Always good to do manual back testing. You will ought to actually understand the charts a lot more. See you 2 weeks down the road and have a great